There's a certain type of Star Wars book that I love. I love a lore book. A book that fixes continuity, but does it so smoothly you won't know the difference. But at the same time, you could pick it up by itself and you get a lot out of it without knowing all the continuity. Death Star by the late and great Michael Reaves and Steve Perry is one of those books. This is about the last 3 years of the creation of the first Death Star. We have a wide variety of characters, from prisoners. We have a prisoner who's forced to be an architect on the Death Star. We have a prisoner who escapes a planet and hides on the Death Star. We have a couple we have an Imperial pilot, a stormtrooper, a cantina owner, and her bouncer. We have one of the characters from MedStar comes back and is a surgeon on the Death Star. And of course, we have movie characters like Tarkin and Darth Vader. So this is, like I said, the last 3 years of the creation of the Death Star. And it's one of the first books that I remember that bridges the prequels to the original trilogy. That was its purpose. Along with explaining why so many rebels got plans to the Death Star. I mean, we had 2 video games. I think there was stuff in the West End Games adventure journals. Like, you could find the Death Star plans. And they explain that. They explain just a lot of continuity. And they also give some perspective to the original Star Wars. Much like James Luceno's Darth Plagueis, that gives a lot of context to the Phantom Menace, this gives a lot of context to A New Hope. From villain perspectives. I mean, we get Darth Vader's perspective with the interrogation of Princess Leia, or just his general thoughts on the Death Star, and of course his duel with Obi-Wan of the Death Star, which is really fascinating. We have a brief appearance from the Emperor in this, and when I say there's a lot of characters, most of these characters aren't bad people, and that's a cool thing that I love that these guys brought up. A lot of these people are either forced in, or, they're recruited by the Empire. Our Imperial pilot, he's a really cool guy. He's a nice guy, and he does end up disillusioned with the Empire, which, I mean, they do horrible things, and he starts to be witness to it. And it's really fascinating as our characters sort of group up, and then they hatch a plan to desert. Meanwhile, A New Hope is happening while this is going on, and it adds all this sort of stress. And it really this book really gives some weight to all the people that are lost on the Death Star. We don't get that in the original Star Wars. Why would you? Like, the Empire's bad, the Rebels are good. It's a story of good and evil. Well, there's not a lot. There's not always good and evil. There's a lot of neutrality. There's people just doing their jobs. And there's like millions of people on the Death Star that just get demolished, basically. And that's fascinating. Of course, we get some great MedStar references in this, which, I mean, that's Michael Reaves, one of his babies. So it's nice to see that, although no I-5. I want to point that out. I-5's referenced, but he's not in this. This might be the only time I-5 is not in a Michael Reaves book. And when I say it's a Michael Reaves book, 98% of this feels like Michael Reaves. It reads more like his stuff than Steve Perry's stuff. And that's not a bad thing. I like both authors. There is a scene that's very Steve Perry-esque, but with a Michael Reaves twist, where 2 of our characters, one's getting a physical, and she just disrobes completely, and the doctor's like, I didn't ask for that. And she's like, you would have anyway. And that's very Steve Perry. He adds like a sexual edge to most of his stuff, and a lot of times it's just kind of creepy and weird. This was just played for a laugh. I like that. I liked a lot of this. Another thing is Admiral Dalla is in this periodically, and Admiral Dalla is, of course, Tarkin's mistress. One thing I do have to say about this, and it's a sign of when this was written, the Marvel comics weren't officially canon, or they were slowly being integrated in. Because at this point, Legacy of the Force wasn't finished yet, and that's when we really started to see certain characters like Lamaya being put in canon. Because up until then, the Marvel comics were secondary canon, so there is no mention of Lady Tarkin in this book. So for you Marvel fans that are Lady Tarkin fans, although I don't know if there's that many people that even remember that Lady Tarkin's a character, other than like Matt Wilkins and me, you're not going to hear about Tarkin's wife. This is the only time, though, that I can think of where we really see Tarkin and Dalla's relationship, which is very interesting, because she's the only thing he seems to care about. Because he doesn't care about his wife. His wife was his marriage was a political move, basically. Although you're not going to get that in here, because they don't even talk about him being married in this at all. It's interesting. And then, like, other characters, the whole rumors of Dalla and stuff, and, like, how they're not allowed to say anything about it because they'll probably be executed. Some other interesting stuff. Admiral Mahdi, you see his perspective, and that whole exchange in the boardroom when Vader chokes him. That's fun. Yeah. There's just so much good in this book that, like, I can easily forgive, like, looking at this. This was 2007 when this came out. This is right in that cusp between the end of the Clone Wars era and TCW taking over and throwing all sorts of trash into the EU. Because there's stuff with the Death Star that's talked about in TCW, I've seen this in reviews, that isn't mentioned in this. And some people give this book crap for that. And personally, you gotta look at when it was published. It was published before TCW was a thing. Like, you're not going to get, like, the Tarkin, Anakin, like, references, which I would argue isn't canon, because it doesn't make any sort of sense. It's the same arc. It's funny, with Even Peel, you know I'm talking about, the Jedi that kind of looks like Yoda, but doesn't, that gets gunned down in Coruscant Nights, another Michael Reeves story, but was killed in the Clone War, because, Dave Filoni didn't actually pay attention to EU. So, yeah, you're not going to see any TCW references here. Unlike Darth Plagueis, which was written later and tried to incorporate certain things from TCW into it because it had to. This was before that. And honestly, it's kind of refreshing. This is one of the last books before the 2008 wrecking of the EU. And what I mean by that is you had two projects that George Lucas backed where there was a blatant disregard for continuity, and then going forward, it was kind of 50-50 if people were going to just blatantly disregard continuity whenever they felt like. I mean, this is when you get your Karen Miller crap, you get the really going into, like, TCW and Force Unleashed, where any sort of established canon is kind of thrown in the garbage and really doesn't make sense. Like, just look at a lot of that material that came out and try to make sense of it in the Legends continuity. It doesn't make any sense. It really doesn't. I feel bad for Quality Autism and him writing all these lore books and trying to decipher what happened. I mean, Brian Wood's Star Wars, that was them straight up saying it had nothing to do with anything. Which, why bother reading that? You know what I'm saying? But anyway, Death Star, personally, I'm going to have to give it a solid 6 out of 5. It's so good. In my opinion, the best Star Wars book ever written. I'm serious. Better than Darth Plagueis, just by a hair. But still, like, this is just pure Star Wars. You can get so much out of it without even knowing any other continuity. And here's the deal. This one has really been tread over by the new canon. I mean, they made Rogue One. You had Catalyst, a Rogue One story, which both the Rogue One novelization and Catalyst, a Rogue One novel or story, whatever it's called, by James Luceno, both in really good reads. If you're going to read new canon, those are 2 books I would recommend over any other new canon. But read Death Star. Death Star's better than both of them. Like, it's just one of the best things just ever written for Star Wars. It's so good. It's so worth your time to check out. So, anyway, have a good one. And rest in peace, Michael Reeves. You really did so much for the expanded universe. And Steve Perry, too. Steve Perry's still around, of course, but Michael Reeves from Shadowhunter, which is the first time we really see Darth Maul's perspective on things, to MedStar, which was MASH in space, Coruscant Nights, which is kind of like a noir story. So interesting. And then this, a history of the Death Star in the last 3 years of its creation. Just wildly different storylines that he just seamlessly goes from one thing to another, like different styles. And it's still, you can always tell it's a Michael Reeves book, and that's a good thing. And with Steve Perry, you always, from Shadows of the Empire to Shadow Games, he's written a lot of great stuff too. So to have 2 titans of the expanding universe writing a book together, highly, highly recommend. So anyway, have a nice day.